Welcome to everybody who's joined the webinar today. We're delighted to welcome Helen Davis, Learning Development Consultant, who has a range of experiences in different areas, talking particularly today about how important it is for a leader to support and create a supportive environment for their staff. So over to you, Helen, and thank you once again.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Well, hello to everybody. Just to set the context, the Institute of Leadership and Management identifies 5 separate dimensions of great leadership, namely ownership, achievement, collaboration, and vision, with authenticity at their heart. Each of the 49 webinars in this Dimensions of Leadership webinar series focuses on one of the components of each dimension, highlighting essential learning to assist your leadership development. The first dimension that we're covering is authenticity. Authentic leaders are recognized by their integrity, and so they inspire trust. They know and they live their values, and they challenge and empower others as well to be the best that they can be. The dimension of authenticity separates the practice of authentic leadership into 8 components, which you can see here, each offering pathways for self-development and improved conversations, resulting in better performing organizations, which in addition are recognized externally as living their values. Today's webinar will explore the particular component of supporting. That is, authentic leaders create a safe and enjoyable working environment. Now, lots of studies have found that when people feel supported at work, that is, when they feel safe and their environment is an enjoyable place to work, they are more productive. There are various ways in which leaders can provide support, but proactively looking after the health and safety of your team, finding ways to make the workplace more fun and upbeat, and ensuring that nobody is bullied or harassed are all extremely important. Keeping your team and customers safe and not exposing them to health hazards is actually usually a matter of simple common sense and should be done because you care about your staff and customers and not because you're frightened of being prosecuted for neglect. As the Health and Safety Executives website says, managing health and safety doesn't have to be complicated, costly, or time-consuming. In fact, it's easier than you think. Not managing health and safety usually turns out to be much more complicated, costly, and time-consuming. If you work in an organization with 5 employees or more, it should actually have a written health and safety policy with which you should familiarize yourself. It's your responsibility to follow it, familiarize your team with it, and ensure to the best of your ability that they follow it. However, remember that you will never be able to remove all risks. Life itself is a risky business, but an effective leader will want to minimize all risks, and legally you are obliged to do so. The best way to identify possible risks is to start by simply walking around your team's workplace or workplaces, looking out for hazards. Involve your staff in this so that you have more than one pair of eyes looking, and also consult them for ideas about how to counteract any dangers you identify. Talk to each team member about any other hazards that they might be confronted with in the course of their work, or which customers or suppliers might face, and what can be done to minimize these. Share your own good practice and insights, and the good practice and insights of longer serving staff with less experienced staff. My first job, and we're going back a bit, but my first job in social housing was for a housing association. And I would drive around all over London, visiting people who had applied to live in one of the association's flats to check their circumstances. I had to do things like check their ovens for cleanliness. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that nobody came and checked my oven for cleanliness, but that's another story. My next job was as an estate officer, also in social housing, managing 1,000 properties. And it used to be part of my job to visit tenants to sort out any rent payment problems or repair requests or disputes with neighbours, things like that. And about a week in, a caretaker from one of the blocks of flats I managed sat me down and taught me a couple of basic safety rules. One, never let a tenant get between myself and the door. And two, always write in my diary back at the office the addresses I'm due to visit and the time I expect to be back. I thought he was just being overprotective because I'd met all sorts of characters in my previous job, and the worst that had happened was one of the applicants opening the door completely naked, something I didn't actually realise until I was inside their property. At the time, I just said it was obviously an inconvenient time for him, and I'd call back. I thought it was hilariously funny at the time, and then an estate agent called Susie Lamplugh disappeared on an appointment of property viewing with a Mr. Fish. Mr. Fish was never located, and neither was she. The national newspapers reported on it for weeks. So when I asked my boss why I'd never had the advice from him that the estate caretaker gave me, he just raised his eyebrows and shrugged. Now, I was particularly young and overconfident, and I did tend to think of myself as invulnerable. And now, of course, things have moved on to the point where people mutter complaints about health and safety having gone mad, but people do also forget and they get careless. When I got to be leader of my own team of housing visitors and estate officers, I made those things that caretaker had told me mandatory rules. So have a look around your team. Is there anything they're getting careless or overconfident about? Bear in mind also that circumstances change. For example, new equipment comes in, office layouts get changed, and your staff change. A new member of staff may be disabled and needs special consideration, or one of your team may become pregnant. If you feel at all unsure about any aspect of health and safety, it's easy to find the Health and Safety Executive's website online, and it is a wealth of really helpful, useful information. So, from health and safety to happiness and humour. The organisation Google has the reputation of having some of the happiest workers. This isn't just to do with the perks it provides, though they can't help because they're things like billiard tables, free haircuts during work hours, free food, shuttle rides to the workplace, and bringing pets into work. But the fact that the staff are given as much freedom and control of their time as possible. Soul-sapping routine work that doesn't vary from day to day is designed out of the system, and all employees have the chance to spend up to 20% of their working week on a project of their own choice. Staff do tend to choose something going on within Google, but when one employee recently decided his project would be world peace, nobody challenged him. Google maintained that this attitude towards its staff is what has made it so successful as a company. And careful research has, in fact, backed this up. A study published in 2014 by the University of Warwick found that happiness at work led to a 12% increase in productivity. The report put this down to positive emotions appearing to invigorate people. Positive emotions and happiness also empower staff, according to Martin Seligman, who is commonly known as the founder of the positive psychology movement, although Abraham Maslow may beg to differ on that one. Staff who feel happy do aim higher and persist longer at work. They feel less stress and tiredness, they work better in a team, and they are more creative at problem solving. So, design out any soul-sapping routines. Advice can be found on how to do this in management literature from about the 1920s onwards. If you can't make the work less mundane or repetitive, at least try to rotate the staff doing it or ensure that they're not isolated doing it. Next, remember staff are happier at work when they are given the opportunity to play to their strengths and display their knowledge and skills. As their leader, you should be well acquainted. I'm sorry, the points are coming up slightly earlier, so just stay with me. Staff, as their leader, you should be well acquainted with the strengths of each member of your team. Interestingly, events like away days and team building exercises can reveal strengths and talents that you don't know that they had. So that's always one advantage of doing something slightly different to the everyday stuff. It tells you more about your staff. Knowing that the work of the organization is meaningful also makes employees happier. So leaders need to be well acquainted with how the organization is creating value or improving the world. As important to meaningfulness at work is knowing just how your own department and individual work tasks are contributing to that organization creating value, and what it would be missing if those tasks weren't done. Bear in mind that when leaders share their vision for the organization and involve staff in developing that vision, which is the case at Google, this also contributes to employee happiness as well. Remember the old story about 3 men involved in constructing the same building, or it could have been 3 women, but traditionally it's 3 men. So they're all constructing the same building, all with different levels of enthusiasm. When he's asked what he's doing, the first and least enthusiastic man replies, "Well, I'm laying bricks." The second man, a little more enthusiastic and asked the same question, says, "I'm building a wall." The third and most enthusiastic worker replies, "I am helping to create the most beautiful cathedral that will stand for hundreds of years and inspire awe in thousands of people." Another source of happiness is being recognized and rewarded for empowered behavior. For example, when you praise staff for using their initiative and creativity. Don't just think, well, that's what they're paid for, even if it is. Last on this list, but not least, never forget that good, constructive relationships with colleagues at work are a major contribution to happiness in the workplace. And the idea of fun and play at work is becoming increasingly important to workers who want to be creative, committed, and motivated. So from massage days, dress down Fridays, to office pets and work choirs, there are many ways that modern progressive companies can help their staff be happier and more productive at work. Laughing and having fun won't negate all the good work you do. It will actually help you improve the great things you're already doing and help you and your team think differently about some of the challenges you face. A leader should definitely not interfere with staff having fun together unless it is seriously threatening a deadline or the quality of the work. Now, positive and negative feelings and attitudes are usually highly contagious among people, as no doubt you have noticed. So if someone in your team is consistently negative, miserable, anxious, aggressive, or who never stops moaning, you need to engage with them directly about it and find out if there is anything you can do to remedy or help the situation. So now we move on to a subject that is very much in the news at the moment with the Me Too hashtag trending, bullying and harassment. If a member of staff appears particularly unhappy, then bullying or harassment might unfortunately be behind it. An unexpected drop in productivity, increased numbers of days off sick, or a negative change in their attitude, these things can all signal that something is wrong. The Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, commonly known as ACAS, points out that while the concept of harassment is grounded in legal definition, for example, in the Equality Act of 2010 and the Protection from Harassment Act of 97, and has associated legal protections and recourse, there is no standard legal definition of what is considered to be an act of bullying. Notions of what constitutes bullying behaviour can vary widely according to context and the perceptions of the people involved. So what may be considered reasonable or authoritative management action by one person, especially if they've come out of an environment themselves which was very much command and control, a style of management which was the norm for a very, very long time. That kind of management may be experienced as bullying by someone else. And so the options for resolution can be very, very unclear as a result. Not so very long ago, an acquaintance of mine started a new job in a financial organization where she was the only woman in that particular office. On her first day at lunchtime, her male colleagues actually tied her to her chair and went off, leaving her there. They later claimed that they did that to all new starters, and it was just good fun, and nobody had ever got hurt. But my acquaintance had her doubts about that. So anyway, look out for any member of staff becoming less productive, taking more days off sick, becoming more negative in their attitude. Bullying and harassment can be extremely hard to recognize. It may seem that someone has overreacted to something that seems to you seemingly trivial, but always investigate this further. The something that they've reacted to may actually be the last straw following a series of incidents. Sometimes, if you have an inkling something is wrong, you have to be quite persistent and at the same time very sensitive in your inquiries. As a bullied or harassed employee might worry that their colleagues will consider them weak if they complain, or they might be actually internalizing the bullying and be considering themselves inadequate or incompetent. Furthermore, there is a syndrome where the people around their workmates might just be relieved that someone else is getting the bullying, not them. So they keep very quiet about it, or they might fear the bully or the harasser, and so aren't prepared to step forward as witnesses. It's a very, very murky area. But anyway, bear in mind, ACAS, the organization we referred to earlier, defines bullying as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behavior, an abuse or misuse of power through means intended to undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. And the same organization defines harassment as unwanted conduct that violates people's dignity or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. So you can make up your own mind as to whether my acquaintance who was tied to her chair on her first lunchtime was harassed or bullied. But on the whole, harassment tends to be more overt and public and more physical. It is usually aimed at someone who is different because of their sexuality or their gender, their ethnicity, age. Bullying is often more private and it isn't always obvious at first. In many cases, the person being picked on is actually competent and popular and is seen as a threat by the bully. As a leader, make sure you know what your organization's procedures are for preventing and tackling bullying. And if they don't seem to have them, ask that they do produce them. Ensure that your staff know what constitutes both harassment and bullying and that neither is acceptable. Intervene immediately if you see harassment or bullying happening or suspect that it might be happening. But as I said, don't point any fingers until you're absolutely sure of your facts, and be aware that there might be quite a lot of information to get through before you get to what's going on. Most importantly, set a good example yourself by avoiding any aggressive behaviour, such as shouting or sarcasm, which a lot of people don't actually consider is aggressive, but it is. So avoid shouting, sarcasm, blaming, or labelling, sort of labelling as in telling a member of staff, this is all your fault, you're absolutely useless. That's labelling. Or finger pointing, or making sweeping statements like all women are flirts, or all football supporters are aggressive, or all old people are useless. They're all sweeping, sweeping broad statements which are actually aggressive. And never give a member of your team the cold shoulder, or to put them down, or put too much work on them, however emotional or put out you might be feeling by their own behaviour. If you treat everybody fairly, if you give positive feedback wherever you can, make sure that all the necessary criticism is constructive and carried out with the staff member involved in private, and really listen to your staff, the chances of bullying or harassment happening are considerably reduced. Okay, so these are our references. And we now move on to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Helen. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Arwen Wilcox. She's the research manager for the Institute, and she's going to be asking questions to yourself and to Kate Cooper. Arwen, over to you.
Jane and Helen, thank you for a really good, insightful presentation. I'm going to start off by asking you, do you ever think that the person being bullied might claim a normal request is bullying as a way of not having to do what you've asked them to do?
Oh, gosh, that's an... Oh, sorry, Helen, I was going to come in on that one, but after you.
I've known that happen quite a few times. The fact is that if it has been a reasonable request and the manager can prove it's a reasonable request and it's in line with with their work, then everyone should be on safe ground. But yeah, there are some people who push it sometimes. When, but as I said, there are these final straws. There may be other things going on. If somebody suddenly explodes at you for something, you think, well, you know, that wasn't very much to ask them. There may be something else going on. So don't ignore it. That would be dangerous. Sorry, Kate, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think I'd support that there. It, often people talk about one thing because they don't really want to talk about the real problem, and it's a way of drawing attention to themselves, and that there may be a genuine issue that they're not comfortable about articulating immediately. So often it might be, well, that was a simple request. Why won't you do it? But as Helen said, take it seriously, because it might be they're trying to tell you something else.
Thank you. Really good answer, really good answers, really good insights. And our next question: if you've got a manager who you observe, and to you, you're seeing their behaviour is bullying behaviour, but when you address them, they genuinely don't think their behaviour is bullying. How would you deal with that situation?
Well, first of all, you have to emphasize the fact that you are finding it bullying. It might be they might have found it's worked with everyone else, but to say, I really don't like it when you do that. And then if they continue, this is when you have to start taking notes. You start noting down what they've done and the times. And then if go back to them again and say, sorry, it's still going on, and I find this awkward, and if they still don't change their behavior, and you still think they are bullying, you need to find someone, possibly in HR, or possibly if you're in a small organization outside the organization, to talk it through with, so that see if somebody else sees your point of view. And then maybe with them on your side, you can go back again. But eventually you may have to raise a grievance, but by that point the relationship may have broken down. So it's difficult, but talk, jaw, as somebody said, not war. So talk it through, and admit your own things. Say, this is how I feel, rather than accusing them, you're a bully. Say, I feel uncomfortable with this, not you're a bully. Kate, can you
I think also in a different situation where perhaps you're observing a peer who appears to be adopting what we would consider bullying behaviour, and you have broached it and said, oh, maybe you're a bit hard on your staff or use sarcasm a lot, and they say no, they love it, there's nothing wrong with how I manage my staff. I think as Helen said, they have their viewpoint is legitimate as anybody else, but it's obvious that you need to have a conversation. And this is where even codes of conduct around bullying and harassment, even if you don't want to implement one, having the conversation about whether we need one and what are the sorts of behaviours, just like Helen's been saying on her list, it makes maybe that person just think again, maybe get to a new understanding of how their behaviour is perceived by everybody. It's not just about their own level of sensitivity.
Thank you. Early on in the presentation, we talked about you talked about safety in all forms. We've had a question asking if this is related to psychological safety as well, in terms of the health and safety stuff.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest problem, outside of construction and engineering, agriculture, some manufacturing, stress at work and mental health. That's the biggest problem. The Health and Safety Executive have identified that. So yes, I think psychological safety. Can you think how I felt after Susie Lamplugh disappeared? Thinking back, all the risks I'd taken. So yeah, that's really important.
And we had another question on if you discover during an investigation process that the person accusing is lying and has been manipulative during their complaint and it can't be upheld, what would you do? But also, what are measures that can be put in place to prevent this type of thing happening?
Well, I'd have a word with them, because you can actually discipline someone who's who's raised a grievance like that, and it turns out they are being manipulative. But do be careful again. So it goes back to that main point. Why have they done this? Why have they behaved like this? Happy people don't behave like that. So are they just trying to get one over on you? So sit them down and talk about what the outcome has been, because something like that will make relationships in the workplace very difficult. Point out what has happened as a result. Point out what might be, you know, that you could discipline them for raising something that wasn't actually true, and then see how it goes on from there. Make a note of it and watch them very carefully in future. But again, watch out for surrounding circumstances. What's the bigger picture?
Thank you, Helen, Kate and Owen. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar.